Now, we've spoken about the FBI's monitoring of environmental and animal rights activists many times before here on the show. But new documents give even more insight into how pointless some of these investigations have been. Pointless in the sense that people are being monitored simply for being anarchists or militant feminists who planned rallies, drove Subarus, and went to farmers markets. It's important to take notice and highlight these issues, of course, because it shows how far the FBI will go under this guise of terrorism to monitor people despite no suspicion of wrongdoing. And thanks to a Freedom of Information Act request, John Cook has been able to glean information on a 3-year-long investigation called Seizing Thunder, as well as a nationwide investigation called Operation Backfire. So let's see just how busy the feds were keeping themselves to supposedly protect us from those with strong political beliefs. Joining me from our studio in New York is John Cook, senior writer for Gawker.com. John, thanks so much for joining us. And at first, I guess, just tell us how it is that you ended up, trying to look into this, filing a Freedom of Information Act request.
Well, I've written a lot about the animal rights movement and animal rights extremism and the federal government's response to it over, especially during the Bush administration. And I had filed some requests just looking at the Animal Liberation Front. And in some of those documents I got back from the FBI, I saw an oblique reference to an investigation called Seizing Thunder, which sounded kind of cool. So I just filed off a request about 3 years ago for that one. And it took them 3 years to get back to me. And it turns out that Seizing Thunder was an investigation run out of the Portland, Oregon office of the FBI. And it had at its root a sort of legitimate, there was a legitimate law enforcement interest. They were looking for some extremists who had committed some arsons across the Pacific Northwest, and also a notorious one in Vail, Colorado in the 1990s that caused about $12 million of damage to a ski lodge. But the investigation quickly metastasized from trying to find these specific individuals to literally just FBI agents sitting in a car outside a farmer's market. Yeah.
I mean, tell us.
I mean, a lot of.
I briefly mentioned, the Subaru, the farmers market, but tell us some of the other examples that you found through these documents.
Well, there's a lot of instances of informants just telling agents about, literally giving them the license plate numbers of every car that parked out of what they called parked outside of what they called a known anarchist hangout, and there's nothing illegal about being an anarchist. There's certainly no federal law against it. So it's just bizarre that we've got, federal law enforcement resources, especially in the wake of 9/11. This is going on 2002 to 2005. Federal law enforcement resources devoted to, just keeping track of what cars are parked out of known anarchist hangouts. There's a lot of instances like that. There's instances of people, a warning that one agent received from an informant saying that the local homeless groups are aligning with anarchist groups and are going to create a homeless camp, as though there's anything the FBI should be involved in there. There's cases of agents monitoring anti-war protests against the IMF and World Bank. And the agents, find out about, there's a memo where an agent very proudly recounts how an informant told him about an upcoming march against the IMF in Eugene, and he informed the Eugene Police Department, and he writes a memo saying, I averted a riot. There was going to be a riot, and because I warned the Eugene Police Department about it, there wasn't a riot. Well, no, it was a march, and there was going to be a teach-in, and some bands were going to play. So these are sort of clueless agents who don't understand, the political activism and think it poses some kind of danger, and so they just sort of, ran amok.
Well, I mean, on one hand, it sounds a little funny at first when you listen to some of the things that they did, and you say, wow, oh, so they're so scared of, of some homeless anarchist alliance or people going to punk rock shows. But, it's not funny, right? This is supposed to be a democracy, and so how dangerous is it when you start being monitored by the FBI, sometimes very stupid-sounding agents, like you mentioned, solely for the fact that you're practicing your rights, that you're expressing your political views?
Well, I mean, it's not quite up to the standards of, the Stasi or the Soviet-era KGB or the Nixon-era FBI, for that matter. I think a lot of it's motivated by this, what happened in the 2000s is the Bush administration said, our top counterterrorism domestic counterterrorism priority is animal rights and environmental extremism. That was the #1 thing, and domestically. And a lot of resources internally in the Department of Justice and the FBI went to environmental and animal rights extremism. And, you know, as of 2005, there were 150 active federal investigations. And I think what happens is just agents who want their careers to succeed look to what their boss's priorities are, and they go with it. And I think that's what's behind a lot of it. I mean, there's not a tremendous amount of indications that any of this intelligence was used, you know, in a pernicious way. It's just sort of they just kind of run amok. Although the one thing that is, there definitely was some chilling, I think, that went on. There was a deliberate effort in the run-up to the 2004 political conventions, 2004 RNC in New York. There was definitely a concerted effort by the FBI and other federal law enforcement agencies to keep track of anarchists, leftists, and ask them, are you going to RNC? What are your plans? And to develop intelligence. And I think a lot of that was aimed at letting people know, we're watching you, don't try anything.
Well, and, you know, I mean, unfortunately, I feel like we hear these stories a lot, right? We've seen the AP's investigation into the NYPD and their surveillance program.